So in this course, we want to build a macroeconomic model of economic slack. And so before we get into the modeling, I think it's important to look at the real world, look at the data to figure out exactly how much slack there is out there, where slack is present, and how it behaves. So when we motivated the exercise, we said that what's missing from modern macro model is so slack. So for instance, unemployment. And we said, that's clearly problematic because if you look at big recessions like the Great Depression in 1929, in the 30s, the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, 2010, what you see is that there is a massive amount of unemployment. And so if we want to be able to understand these events, we need to have a model that features some unemployment. But what we'll realize actually, slack is much more prevalent than than this. It's not true that slack only occurs during deep downturns. Slack is always present at any point in time. Of course, sometimes there is more of it, sometimes there is less of it. And it's not only present on the labor market, it's present on almost any market. So before we get into the modeling, I want to show you a little bit the empirical evidence we have on slack and look at the data so that we have a good sense of what it is that we want to model later on. So the most important and the most covered form of slack is slack on the labor market. Slack on the labor market is unemployment, is the fact that we have unemployed workers. And so that's what I want to discuss here. So first thing we need to know is, an unemployed worker is a worker who wants to sell his or her labor and is not able to. So I want to look a little bit at the data on that. So of course, first thing you need to be aware of is how unemployment is measured in practice. Before we even look at the data, what it is for a worker to be unemployed. So here we're going to focus on the US. So the definition of an unemployed worker involves several criteria. So first of all, so what does it mean for a worker to be unemployed? And of course, you need to know that definition so that then you need to know what the data mean exactly. So first of all, you have to be more than 16 years of age. So only people who are above 16 would be counted in this data. There is no upper limit, there is no upper age limit in the data. You have to reside, of course, because here we're looking at US data, you have to reside in one of the 50 US states. So US citizens who live abroad are not going to be counted in this data. You have to be part of what's called the civilian labor force. And so what that means is that you have to be not in the armed forces. So if you're a soldier, you're not going to be part of this data. So that's the first thing. That's why it's called civilian labor force. And the second thing is that you cannot be part of an institution, so either a mental institution or a penal institution. And anybody else, either not in the armed forces or not institutionalized, will be part of our data. So if you satisfy these three criteria, living in the 50 US state, being above 16, not in the armed forces or in institutions, then you're part of the civilian population. what's often counted as a civilian population. And then in the civilian population, you can either be employed, you can be unemployed, or you can be out of the labor force. And so in particular, what does it mean to be unemployed? So first criteria, of course, is to have no job. The second criteria is to be ready to work. And the third criteria is to have been actively searching for a job in the past four weeks. So in particular, if you have no job and if you're ready to work but you haven't been actively searching, then you will not be counted as unemployed. Okay, and so people who have jobs are of course employed, and people who have no jobs and are either not ready to work or not actively searching, they are outside of the labor force. Okay, and so being unemployed, it's somebody who really wants to work right now, but somehow, they are not able to find a job. So it's something that's not, that's really at odds with what, say, a Walrasian market would predict, because in the Walrasian market, there is a market wage, and anybody who wants to work at the given wage is able to find a job. But that's not, if we see unemployment, it means that, we are not in a Walrasian market where markets are clearing. And it's also inconsistent with, monopolistic view of the labor market. In the monopolistic view of the labor market, like workers decide how much labor they want to supply given the labor demand offered by firms. And so, everybody is happy. It's in a sense profit, the amount of labor that's offered, and the wage that's charged is what maximizes profits or utilities for workers. And so, there is no sense in which you would have workers in there who want to work but are not able to work. Like all the workers collectively decide how much they work and at which salary. And so this idea of being unemployed wouldn't prevail if you had a monopolistic view of the labor market, like what we assume in the New Keynesian model. So if we see unemployment, it's really inconsistent with either a real business cycle model or a New Keynesian model. And instead, it means that we need to have, a model that will feature unemployment. So this is a definition of being unemployed. You have to be in the civilian population, and then you have to be without a job, ready to work, actively searching in the past 4 weeks. So let's see now how much unemployment we have in the US. So these are data from FRED, the macro database that's put together by the St. Louis Fed. So this is the unemployment rate. What you can see here is the unemployment rate in the US. So how is that measured? So this is measured through a household survey by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can see here. And the name of that survey is the Current Population Survey. So good thing to know, which we refer to as CPS. So the Current Population Survey actually has been running since 1940, but initially it was administered by the Census Bureau, and since 1948, here it's been administered by the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. So these are the data that we see here, and it goes all the way to today here, 2022. And you recognize you have little gray areas everywhere. These are the official recession dates in the US, and these recession dates that you can see here, US recessions. The timing of this is determined by the NBER dating committee. Okay, so that's where all of these things are coming from. So what can we see? Well, first thing that you can see is that it's true that in recessions you have more unemployment than in normal times. So here we can see a few particularly striking episodes. So here you can see here with almost 15% of the labor force unemployed, that's the COVID recession. That's a massive amount of people unemployed. Then you can see other very big recessions. So here you can see, so that's just 2020. Then you can see in at the end of 2009 here, about 10% of the labor force that's unemployed. That's the Great Recession in 2009. So this is COVID. This is the Great Recession. Yes, so we should also say, so the units, it's in percent. And so this is, in fact, percent of the labor force. That's always how the unemployment rate is measured. Okay, so the labor force, of course, are people who are unemployed and people who are employed. So basically, the sum of the people who are ready to work and are actively searching for work, and either they have a job or they don't have a job. This is the labor force. It doesn't include people who do not want to work or would like to work but are not actively searching. So you can see Great Recession about 10%. You see the Volcker disinflation and recession here, with again an unemployment rate slightly above 10%. That's the Volcker recession. Then you can see a bunch of other recessions. So here, when unemployment was at almost 8%, that's the Iraq War recession. You can see here a much in 2000 dot-com bubble bust, much smaller recession with an unemployment rate only around 6% here. Here we have the dot-com. Then you can see in the mid-70s, fairly severe recession, unemployment rate also around 8%. That due to a large increase in oil prices, and then you can see more recessions, in the 50s and 60s. So what we can see, it's true that in recession you have high unemployment, but you can see that at any point in time there is unemployment. So the lowest unemployment we can see on record here is 2.5%. So that corresponds to actually the end of the Korea War, where unemployment was only 2.5%. And we can see that after that, actually the current situation is also very unique for the low level of unemployment. So here you can see today, in the end of the summer of 2022, unemployment is at 3.5%, which is also very low by historical standard. But the bottom line is that there is always some unemployment, there is always some slack, and of course, it's less of a problem in good times, it's much worse in recession, but there is always some unemployment. And in fact, you can take the average here. You can take the average of the unemployment rate over the whole period, and it's good to know roughly what we're talking about. And the average, if you took the average around the entire period, you would get an unemployment rate of 5.7%. This is the average unemployment rate for the US over the entire sample we have here. So there is always some unemployment. And that's why, we don't want to have a model in which usually markets are clearing and then suddenly in bad times there's something special and we see unemployment. There is always some unemployment. It's something that always exists. So because this CPS data only started in 1948, the issue here is we don't see what happened during the Great Depression, which is, of course, the worst recession that occurred since records have started, basically. But fortunately, the NBR has a bunch of historical database that they've collected from different sources that allow us to get a picture of what was happening during that time. And you can also find this historical database on Fred. So here, this is the unemployment rate in the US again, but you can see the dates are different. This is starting in 1929. And going all the way to 1942. And you can see that the source of this data are different. This is not from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but this is from the National Bureau of Economic Research. So the NBR, and these data were not collected by, well, they are not originally from the NBR. The NBR is storing all this data, but they've collected them from other primary sources. What's very nice with this specific series is that it covers all of the Great Depression, which you have again here. And you also have a secondary recession that happened just before World War II. And you see World War II, of course, started in 1939. So you would have here somewhere here. So all of this period here is World War II. And so this is quite interesting because you can see the amplitude of the crisis of the Great Depression. You can see that the unemployment rate here at the peak of the crisis reached 25%, which is something that we haven't seen since then. Even at the peak of the COVID pandemic in the spring of 2020, the unemployment rate in the US only reached 15%. So the Great Depression was really on another scale. It was really just a massive amount of unemployment. You can see that in that secondary recession that happened in 1937, 1938, again, unemployment peaked at about 20%, which is extremely high too. And you can see that between these two recessions, unemployment remained very, very high. But what's very interesting is that before the Great Depression, the economy was really booming. You can see here that the unemployment was almost zero. And during World War II, of course, due to the war effort, which is a combination of big amount of production for the war, of weapons, and also shipping out a lot of potential workers to fight in the armed forces and therefore reducing the size of the labor force, unemployment, which is a share of the labor force that's unemployed, really fell down. And in 1942, again, we arrive at an unemployment rate that's almost zero. So essentially everybody in the labor force was working. And that's quite typical of, if you look at all the war episodes in the US, there are periods of very low unemployment and very tight labor markets. But so if you're interested in this period, you can find this historical data to look at what was going on the labor market. And as we can see here, there was just a massive amount of unemployment. It was really a big catastrophe. So if you're interested actually in what happened during the war and the recovery from the war, NBR has other data sources that look at a slightly different period. So here I'm showing you another graph that's on Fred that also comes from the NBR that covers, it comes from a different source, but that covers exactly World War II plus the aftermath from the war. And again, that's hosted on the Fred database. And so you can see unemployment started very high at the beginning of the war, around 15%, and then it decreased and reached, you can see, almost zero towards the end of the war in 1945. And so, there are a lot of historical data if you're interested in this.